Hello everybody. For this video, I would like to discuss borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is often generalized into a person being highly unstable. And while that is the case, there are deeper depths as to why they're unstable, and it goes far beyond just character. It is actually something psychological and something within their personality that affects them to have this type of behavioral outcome of it all. And with this disorder is highly emphasized and accurately depicted in the movie and also book known as Girl Interrupted. I actually have a copy right here. It's written by the individual herself. She had borderline personality disorder, and it's a whole memoir of everything that she witnessed and experienced while she was in a psychiatric housing. And it's very fascinating because you get a little bit of a better glimpse at it, and you see that it's a little bit more common, and it actually is statistically more common for people to have this disorder because a lot of people misconstrue it as character, while it can be a little bit bigger than the person experiencing it because they do need to seek treatment, and treatments can be effective in treating it and alleviating it. And in Susanna Kaysen's case in Girl Interrupted, she was actually able to be recovered from that disorder. So let's dive right in. It is a persive pattern of instability. So the reason and the stemming of the instability with the person experiencing it has a lot to do with their self-image, their interpersonal relationships, and even their moods. So this disorder, if it goes undiagnosed, can possibly be misconstrued and misdiagnosed as just another mood disorder. It may be misconstrued as depression or anxiety. And while those are overlapping symptoms and overlapping conditions that the borderline personality disorder individual may be experiencing, it may be bigger. It may be this actual disorder. And what ends up happening is that they have this identity disturbance, and it's constantly pervasive in their everyday life. So who they are is often brought into question by themselves. What they believe in, what they want to believe, who they want to go for, who they want to become in life. It's very unstable, and it goes past somebody just wanting to explore themselves and someone wanting to get to know themselves. It goes into the extent where this individual literally cannot grasp one single identity and can't really settle into who they are. They constantly feel that they don't know who they are, and they constantly feel like they have to try out all these different kind of costumes to see which one fits. I guess that would be the best visual depiction of how this person feels as they're going through their stages in life. And it's usually manifested by uncertainty about severe life issues. Like, it won't just be an uncertainty with what they like or what they don't like. It'll be with their self-image. It'll be with their orientation of who they choose to have relationships with. It'll be long-term goals and career choices. For example, it'll manifest itself with friends and lovers and values that they adopt. So whereas we are constantly ever changing, and I think one of the greatest gifts we have as human beings is the ability to change, to adapt, and to constantly recreate and add to our identities. While that is one of the greatest gifts that we have, and their ability to choose who we are, with borderline personality disorders, they feel like they are constantly being reassessed, or they're constantly reassessing themselves because they feel like with all the choices out there, it's kind of hard to pinpoint one, or they maybe they constantly question themselves. I had like a word blend going on. I'll go over that in another video. But basically what ends up happening is that they are constantly calling into question who they are, and they're constantly feeling like they don't fit in with who they are, and they constantly don't feel that who they are is stable enough, or has like kind of an expiration date. And it can be very, very tormenting. I can imagine for the individual experiencing it, because they never feel like they have a grasp on their life. They feel like they are constantly trying to kind of run away from themselves or run to themselves even, so it can be very problematic because while as an outsider, a lot of people will see them as, oh, they're doing this to themselves, they're causing themselves to be unstable in life. That's not the case. They're tormented by this instability, and therefore imagine how hard it is to constantly have your psychological well-being tell you that you need to change, or your personality is ever changing and you can never get a grasp or set your roots anywhere. And I mean, I can imagine how frustrating it is for somebody who has that, because as it is, a lot of us as a human experience don't, well, we handle adversity the way we handle it, but adversity is never something very easy to deal with, initially. It becomes easier with time. Whereas someone with borderline personality disorder is kind of constantly facing that adversity whenever those values that they had adopted for a long time are called into question, and then they have to change it, and they have to adapt, and they have to change it, and they have to adapt. So it takes its toll on whoever is experiencing it, because of the fact that they're constantly having to start over, and they're constantly feeling like they have to rebuild themselves because they feel like whatever life they had previously been leading isn't the greatest fit, and they feel like they haven't been able to grasp onto that. And it has a lot of exasperated things that can come out of it. It can have a lot to do with self-esteem. It can have a lot to do with other underlying psychological disorders that have developed into this. And in extreme cases, borderline personality disorder can actually pretty much manifest itself as if a person has a split personality. And I'll go over that in another video. But sometimes it can be depicted so severely that this individual may question whether they have other personalities or not. Or they may even exasperate it to where it develops into that in order to protect themselves. And the instability, for example, for self-image, is a chronic feeling of emptiness and boredom. So this individual too will constantly feel like there's some sort of dissatisfaction or a void in their life, which is what causes them to run away from themselves, for example. So a borderline personality disorder is often seen as a villain, and it's understanding to see why some people will see that if they fall victim to a sudden life change that this person takes on, or they get dropped on a dime by this person, or they're trying to get a grasp on this individual. It can be frustrating for somebody as a bystander, but when you understand this disorder, you can see that they're also victims to themselves. They're also tormenting themselves and their well-being and their livelihood. They aren't just trying to hurt people, but there's something inside that's causing them to feel this constant emptiness and boredom and this constant need to change who they are and try to adapt into something. Like they need to be something, and they feel like when they aren't, they have to constantly recreate it and abandon their lifestyles or constantly leave their lives in order to rebuild themselves again and get like it's kind of like a video game, that life runs out and then they get researched, and the life runs out and they get spawned into something else. It's just it's an exhaustible experience for this individual to find who they are and to find their roots and to ground into life as it is. And basically it can get to dangerous levels. While we all have different personalities, we all have different ways of handling things. Borderline personality disorder can cause people to either internalize all of that, but if it does get into the outside world, if it does pour into that external extension of themselves, it can affect their interpersonal relationships as well. And while if this is an unsuitable situation for you, I mean, it's understandable if somebody leaves somebody that has things that they cannot deal with in the long run, and a lot of those traits that people wouldn't favor in a relationship are traits that are in an individual with borderline personality disorder. So that's why they have this really tough interpersonal relationship part of their life. That's why that area in their life is very rocky and very shifty and especially unstable. So what happens is that in interpersonal relationships, since they are unstable, It can range in many different ways. Like, it's not always the fact that they want to leave, but it can range from an over idealization of what the relationship is going to be, and even a devaluation of the relationship itself. So that's what causes instability, because of the fact that the individual with borderline personality disorder has recreated themselves, and as they recreated themselves, their image has changed, and their values have certainly changed. So therefore, their interpersonal relationships fall victim to the different changes and the instability of that. So therefore, that over-idealization may come from the fact that their values have changed, and what they value in a relationship has significantly changed. And I'm not talking about when we kind of normally or typically reassess things and we adapt our values and we learn something new and we change our values. No, it's in the sense where it completely shifts to something very different from what it previously used to be. And when it's a devaluation, it also goes hand in hand with the values that shift during that, instability episode. So therefore, it causes a relationship to get on a different perspective all of a sudden. Things are shifted into being seen differently. Whereas, like, if nothing has necessarily changed in the relationship, it is literally the person that has, and the way they see it and what they choose to value. So, for example, if they over idealize the romantic gestures of somebody, or they over idealize the weight of that happiness a relationship will bring them, and if it doesn't reach that, because of the fact that this person already has that feeling of emptiness, it will cause a lot of, different effects, and it'll cause this person to want to run away and start over with somebody else in such an extreme manner. Not in a healthy manner where, you're dating, you're getting to know people, and then you leave if it's not for you, but in the sense where it's like, just leave and abandon it all and just start fresh and start the page over. Even in severe cases where there are kids involved or there's marriage involved, it becomes just so impulsive in a drop of a hat. And another thing is the fact that, given that they have difficulty being alone and they have difficulty sitting alone because they're faced with all of those ever-changing emotions, those ever-changing self-image depictions, and those ever-changing values, it's very hard for an individual experiencing this disorder to really sit with themselves and to not have a distraction of a relationship. And because they put such heavy weight on that relationship, or they put such heavy weight in circumstances, it causes a lot of turmoil, and it causes it to be very unhealthy, because it's not good to put all your eggs in the basket, so to speak, as the saying goes. And a lot of that can have to do with a lot of that can also, for example, lead to these frantic efforts to avoid that abandonment. So a person with borderline personality disorder is experiencing this emptiness, and while in that emptiness and while in that boredom, there's this like whirlwind of different ideals flowing into them, and this whirlwind of them needing to change or do something different. And in the relationship, for example, they have that fear of abandonment because they can't sit with themselves. They don't want to be alone with all of that they have to deal with. They don't want to be alone with themselves and all the weight that they are, and all the weight of their thoughts and emotions and character changes. So they have these exasperated imagined abandonment scenarios playing through their heads. And in order to avoid that, for example, the reason why they're unstable is because oftentimes these people are more prone to making an impulsive decision to leave people before they are left. So here's where I really want you to understand this individual. So while it's, you don't have to condone their behavior, and you have the right to surround yourself with what is better for your psychological well-being. But for example, if you are in a relationship with someone who has borderline personality disorder, and know that, or you have had experience with someone with borderline personality disorder or witnessed somebody with it, the reason why they leave and have to reset so often is because that fear of abandonment kicks in. And when that fear of abandonment kicks in, they head for the hills, because they would rather leave and start over and do everything from scratch again around their values, their self-image, etc., then to be left. Because when they're left, they're faced with that abandonment. They're faced with that emptiness before they even prepare themselves for their quote-unquote new life. So that's when, while it's very impulsive and while it can affect so many people in their lives at that moment, it comes from this void that is really deep within that person. And when it gets a little bit more severe and when it can harm more people, oftentimes because of all of that turmoil inside of them, they have inappropriate, intense anger, and that can even lead to fights. So because there is instability already underlying there, it won't always be so predictable and so manageable. Some people, given their personality, given their character, and given all their life experiences thus far, they will have outbursts and their moods will just fluctuate extremely. So it can even be misconstrued as bipolar disorder. But that's why it's very important for somebody who suspects this to get it pinpointed a little bit more, because it can be misconstrued as bipolar disorder when it comes to the mood and with that intense anger and that impulsiveness. But what sets people aside with borderline personality disorder is that their impulsions typically veer in the direction of activities that are self-damaging. So that's a little bit of the difference. Whereas someone with bipolar disorder, just to put it briefly, will go through cyclical cycles of depression and mania. They'll just feel it, and their behavior will be a little bit more out there, and it'll be based on that mania or depression. But with a borderline personality disorder, they won't necessarily have those waves of emotions. It'll be on an impulse. It'll be right then and there. And the activities that are self-damaging can range from, they'll be self-harming in very, very severe cases. In very, very severe cases, these people self-harm. So in the example of Susanna Kaysen in Girl Interrupted, she would do a lot of things to her body to escape all of those depersonalizing things that she would feel and that emptiness that she would feel inside of her whenever she would experience those episodes. Because that's another good way and another good key term to walk away from this. There's a depersonalization where the person that's in there feels like they're just kind of like jittery within their body, so they tend to self-harm to try to get a grasp on what they're feeling and try to get a grasp back into their bodies, because of the fact that there's like this weird little tiny tornado inside of them, so to speak. And where it's more similar is that they'll range into substance abuse. So they'll be a little bit more direction of they're more prone to being substance abusers. They'll go on shopping sprees. They'll have reckless driving or reckless acts in public. They'll be hooking up with different people too. So they will have a little bit more of a tendency to have a lot of casual encounters with people, and oftentimes with people they don't even know. And it'll range in that impulse. And there's shoplifting, binge eating. Like, there's so many manifestations that borderline personality can take on, but it needs to be a constant state of their character in order to be who they are, and rather than just a phase that they're going through in life. In very, very severe cases too, people with this disorder can have a lot of suicidal tendencies and behaviors. And it's important to be very observant of that, because these individuals have a lot of pain inside of them and a lot of emptiness that they feel inside of them. So those self-harm things shouldn't be taken lightly. Definitely shouldn't be taken lightly at all. Whenever it comes to also the way they are with other people, borderline personality disorder individuals, while they are also unstable, may be also a little bit more manipulative with people, because of the fact that since they're so impulsive, a lot of things in their life, a lot of areas in their life are a little bit at the mercy of how they're feeling, how they perceive things, and how they address things, and how they express themselves, and how they approach the world. So it ranges from anger, it can range to numbness, and of course, back to that term, that depersonalization effect. So people with borderline personality disorder typically are treated by, a lot of it has to do with dialectical behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, because these people need to be able to address their condition in a more soft setting. They need to be able to understand their triggers, their behavior, their cognitions, and how that triggers all of those impulses that they have, and that instability and that feeling of instability and that need to constantly change who they are or harm themselves. And the when it comes to the affectiveness of it, their affective instability is, I think, the most common manifestation of it. While the other things I listed are that whole spectrum, every person is different when they have this disorder, but the very, very common baseline of it all is that they have affective instability, and their mood shifts from that baseline emotion that they're experiencing at the moment, and it can go to depression, irritability, and anxiety. And because of that, these people are trying to get out of themselves, and they'll do all of these dangerous, impulsive things to get them out of themselves, to get them out of their heads, to get them distracted from that void, that boredom, and that emptiness that they feel within them. So while the stigma of people with this disorder is to see them as reckless individuals that just that wreak a lot of havoc in people's lives, it's important to realize that these individuals have instability within them, not just in their external lives. And they do need treatment, because it is important to get a grasp of that, because otherwise this disorder can take a toll on an individual, and it can make them feel very alienated and alone. And while they do a lot of behaviors and actions that hurt others, I feel like it always starts somewhere. Hurt people hurt people. So people with borderline personality disorder are misunderstood. And if they get the proper treatment, if they get that therapy that they need, I feel they'll be able to show up as a better individual for others and for themselves, so that they can have stable lives. Because in life, while there's so much unpredictability around it, but if a person cannot be stable with the things that really, really matter, then it can be very hard to deal with all of that extra unpredictable stuff. So if you know somebody who has borderline personality disorder, or you may have borderline personality disorder, be very kind to them, be very kind to yourself, and make sure that you urge yourself or these individuals to seek help, because they need to be able to have some sort of stability in their lives. And I know deep down, a lot of people, and from researching a lot of different individuals and hearing Susanna Kaysen's narrative on this, that a person with that disorder secretly does want that stability in their lives, and they want to get out of that pattern. And it all starts with them. It all starts with wanting to do it and taking that first step and being able to step outside of that in order to be a very healthy, balanced individual in life, and therefore everything else falls into place. So I hope this video has been very helpful, and please share it if you need to, and do more research. And I do recommend reading that book or watching the movie if you haven't already. It's very fascinating, and it actually touches base on other psychological disorders, because of the fact that she met other people who were there for other psychological disorders. So check it out. Thank you so much for watching and for your support. Have a good mental health day. Thank you.